Okay. I think that'll get us going. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Jeremy Jones. I'm from the Lake St. Catherine Association. We've got a lot of great people here this evening to talk about the Lake Watershed Action Plan that has been underway for about 3 years, maybe 3 years plus that we've been working on it with lots of folks that I'll introduce to you in a second. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who's here tonight. And also thank you to Hillary and Pulte Meadowy and Sadie for all their work, and Evan from Fitzgerald Environmental, and Andy's here from Castleton University, and Emily, who you'll see in a second, who's joining us. Oh, is it still Castleton, or is it just Vermont? Okay, cool. And we've also got our limnologist, Emily Porter-Goff, who is on the call, and she'll present a couple of slides as well. Yeah. Can you hear us, Emily? She might be muted.
Loud and clear, yes.
Okay, thank you. Because we can't see you because we're doing the slideshow. So that's everybody who I just introduced, so thank you all for coming. So this is what we're going to talk about tonight. So we're going to talk about basically what a watershed action plan is, what we were doing before we started working on the watershed action plan, and then we're going to talk about our current conditions around the lake. So in lake, shoreline, roads and culverts, streams, wetlands, forest blocks, and then we're going to show you some projects that we picked. And at the last meeting that we had in February, those have been designed. And then we'll show you those, and then we'll also show you the other potential projects. So on normal watershed action plans, you might have many more projects that are involved, but back in 2018 and 19, Emily and Evan went around and they created the stormwater master plan for Lake St. Catherine. So those are 50 projects that they found at that time. And those projects have been, 6 have been implemented, and we've designed another 10 or so, and we're gonna have a meeting about that at the end of the month. So those are 10 new projects that are also gonna be, that we're gonna look for funding for around the lake to reduce stormwater runoff into the lake. Then we'll talk about, we'll ask see if you guys have any questions, and then we'll go into next steps about what's happening next with the watershed action plan. So what is a Lake Watershed Action Plan, or an LWAP? So a Lake Watershed Action Plan is designed to identify and communicate the problems and fixes within a lake watershed to best protect the water quality, wildlife habitat, and the lake's ecosystem and health. So these plans answer the questions: what issues threaten the health of our lake the most, and what can we do about them? So as you can see here on this image, we've got 3 watersheds. So the orange line shows you the entire watershed of the whole lake, which includes all 3 of our basins. The yellow that you see down through here, so this would indicate the watershed of the Lily Pond. And then this is the watershed of Little Lake. And then the whole orange outline is the entire watershed of Lake St. Catherine. So this is what we've been doing as part of the Lake Watershed Action Plan work in the field. So road management and cross culverts, looking at those, assessing the wetlands, the forests, the streams, our inlet conditions, upland sources of sediment. So when I showed you that picture of the watershed, what happens up there can greatly affect what's going on in the lake. So that's why we're assessing up in there as well. Development trends around the lake, and land use. So what's interesting about our watershed action plan that's slightly different from others in the state is that Hillary and Pulte Meadowy group, they looked at the cross culverts, they looked at our wetlands, and they looked at our forest blocks. So that's kind of unique for lake watershed action plans in the state. So we're doing a little bit more than other lakes might be doing on these plans. A lot more. Thank you, Evan. So yes, a lot more. So these are our funders. This was back in 2021. We applied for a grant from Lake Champlain Basin Program, LCBP, and NUIPIC. They used to have a much longer name, and they've shortened it to just that acronym there. Yeah, so they did that officially, so I was able to shorten that up. So it stands for New England Interstate Water Protection Pollution Control Commission. So they just shortened it to the acronym. Martha Prophet, who was a former trustee, it was her idea to kind of go after this, and we worked with Hillary and we applied for it, and then got the team together. So it's been a great partnership with all our partners on this project. So we'll start off with some of the things that we were doing already before we started working on the LWAP. So these are things that we're doing to prevent and control AIS in the lake. So AIS is aquatic invasive species. So our lake has a few aquatic invasive species, one of which that you're probably most familiar with is Eurasian water milfoil. Another one is the invasive fish called the alewife. And we also have another invasive plant called curly leaf pondweed, which is exploding in the Little Lake right now. If you drive by the Little Lake, you'll see that's the stuff that's topped out right now. That grows very quickly in the springtime and then dies back. So that's what you see right now. The leaves look like little lasagna noodles. So that's how you know that that's curly leaf pondweed. So we've got a program that we started a couple years ago, which is a Vermont program where it's called the Vermont Invasive Patroller. So we go out in kayaks and we do patrols around areas where aquatic invasive species might be introduced. So like at the boat launch, at the state park. And we look for those, and it's kind of an early warning system. We look for those to see if anything's been introduced, and if we find something, we alert the DEC right away. Then we've got the public access greeter program. We've been doing that since the early 2000s. So what that does is at the boat launch, when a boat comes in, we have greeters that we pay as part of this program, and they inspect the trailers and the boats to make sure that they're not bringing a new invasive species like zebra mussels or golden clams from another lake, which are just a lake away up at Lake Bomazene. Then we've got our milfoil control program. We have 5 components of that: education, volunteer cleanup, our diver-assisted suction harvesting team, herbicide spot treatments, and our water quality improvement projects, which limit the phosphorus that gets into the lake, which helps for weed growth. Then we partner with Hillary and her team with the Lake Education and Action Program, LEAP, which is a great pairing with the LakeWise program. So those 2 programs kind of happen at the same time around the lake. And the LakeWise program is a state program where we work with the homeowners directly on their property to make it lake friendly, to make their shoreline lake friendly. We've got a couple of LakeWise winners here, right? So that's a great program, and it makes your shoreline filter the water before it goes in so it doesn't carry phosphorus and other sediments and pollutants into the lake from your individual property. Then I talked about the Stormwater Master Plan a little while ago. That's the one where the lake was evaluated for areas where stormwater runoff is causing issues with sending sediments and phosphorus into the lake. So those were identified, and we're working on projects to get those fixed. So then there's the lay monitoring program. Mary Jo does the bi-weekly water collection in the Big Lake and the Little Lake. Starting on Labor Day and ending at or Memorial Day to Labor Day. And those go to the state and they test that. And we've got 40 plus years of water quality data that has been collected as part of that program. Then we've got the tributary monitoring program that Hillary and Andy have been working on. So they get some funding through the La Rosa program to do stream quality monitoring. And you'll learn a little bit more about that coming up. And then we've got some education and outreach things that we've been doing. Libraries Love Lakes. We just had a event last weekend where we debuted the watershed model, which you saw when you walked in. It's really cool. Unfortunately, it's not filled with water to show you exactly how it works, but you could take a look at it. It looks great. We're hoping to have another Libraries Love Lakes event this year, hopefully at the state park. And we always try to keep everybody up to date with events and meetings. from our website and social media to keep everybody involved and informed on what we're doing for the association. So let's look at some current in-lake conditions that we have. So we mentioned the tributaries monitoring. And so this is a DEC map showing the streams and tributaries that are leading into the lake. And we're hoping to do some more monitoring of our tribs for macroinvertebrates, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then the state is doing what's called a next generation lake assessment. This has been a multi-year process where they've been taking lots of data about the lake. We're still waiting for the data. It's been completed, but we're still waiting from the DEC to give us that data. And once they give us that, we'll share that with you. But you can see they look at crayfish, they look at plants, they look at the macroinvertebrates, they look at conditions of the water. So that's going to give us a lot of new information about the lake. And then we did some sediment coring, and Emily is going to talk about these. This was really cool. We, back in August of last year, we went to the deepest part of the lake, and we took this sediment core, which was about 65 feet down. We dropped this device into the lake, and it took a big section of sediment. We pulled it up, and we sent it out to be tested for the microorganisms or the diatoms that are in there. And we also dated it to see how far back in time we went to the bottom sediment. So these are cookies that you see right here. So the sediment core is here on the bottom. So what Emily and the team did was slowly push up what they call a cookie. And this is the cookie right there, that little piece right there. And then that gets pulled off into a testing container, and then those all got sent out. So I'll hand this over to Emily to talk about these.
Hello, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
All right. So this was a pretty fun day going out and grabbing that sediment sample. So we wanted to use the sediment samples for two different types of analysis. So we used some of the top slice, so the most recent sediment layers in the bottom of the lake, as well as the oldest slice that our coring device was able to get. And we sent those off to figure out what kinds of diatoms were living in the lake in those two time periods. So diatoms are a type of algae that basically has its own greenhouse. It has a cell wall made out of silica or glass. And so when the organisms die, those glass are called frustules, end up washing to what we call the belly button of the lake, the deepest dark spot, or the deepest spot in the lake. And those silica frustules preserve really well. So we can look back in time and see what diatoms were living in the lake when. And diatoms, different species have different requirements for where they can live. Some are extremely sensitive and can only live in very particular types of water, whereas others are more generalists and can put up with a bunch of different fluctuations, or maybe higher salt levels or super high nutrient levels. So by seeing what diatoms are present or absent, we can deduce a whole bunch of information, but in our case, we specifically looked at phosphorus levels. So we were comparing the diatoms that lived there most recently to the oldest ones we could get our hands on to see what they said about how much phosphorus was in the lake during those two time periods. And then we paired that with radio dating, so of the decay of lead-210. We sent, for that particular type of analysis, we had to send a whole bunch of slices because they use a regression to estimate the age of your core. So if you can go to the next slide. let's see. So these were from the diatoms alone. So the top slice was according to their diatom models, and this is what is used for the EPA nationwide lake analysis. Just looking at the types of diatoms that are there, that our current phosphorus levels are around 12 parts per million, right? Which is pretty close to accurate. I think the actual number depends what time of year and whatnot you're looking at, but around 13. So that shows us that our model is actually working well. And then the oldest cookie that we could sample came back with an estimate phosphorus level of around 6 micrograms per liter. So that means between now and whenever that oldest layer was from, we have doubled the amount of phosphorus in the lake. And we also, richness is referring to species richness. So we did lose some level of diversity. We saw over 30 species historically, and now there's a little over 20. We also saw the presence of an invasive diatom in the most recent cookie, which is why our diatom condition index was so poor. So that's looking at how tolerant the most common species are. So that invasive diatom that was most of our data is really tolerant. So that gave us this really poor diatom condition index. If you go to the next slide, I think it jumps into the radiocarbon dating, the lead dating. Yep, so here's our regression, which shows us the decay of lead-210 over time. So according to their measurements, our oldest cookie is estimated to be from about 1850, giving us about 175 years look into the past. So we believe about 175 years ago, phosphorus in the lake was about 6 parts per milligrams per liter. So 1850 is not pre-colonial, unfortunately, which means that 6 is probably still affected by human development. And can you go to the next slide? And then one thing we found interesting, so they also looked at how quickly sediment was accumulating. So if you think about, like, if you look at the rings of a tree, you know, when you cut down a tree and you can see the rings, and one ring represents a year, but they're not all the same thickness because it depends on how much rain there was that year and how many sunny days there were. So some years the tree's going to grow a lot, and other years it's not going to grow so much. So the lake lays down layers of sediment, and in some years they're going to get a lot of sediment, and then other years there's going to be very little sediment. And that largely does have to do with weather conditions as well. But human activity by far overshadows that. So we saw a huge jump, and we were seeing really thick layers of sediment from about, what did I say, 1875 to about 1920. And so we were wondering what was going on in the watershed during that window of time. So Jeremy reached out to the Historical Society to see if they had any historical records that might help us answer that. And some of the information that they came back with was, so Lake St. Catherine Hotel was built around 1859. It was one of the first buildings on the lake. By 1910, there was about 100 cottages. We have a photograph showing people cutting ice on the lake around, I think the photo was from around 1910, but you can tell by the age of the apparent age of the trees growing up that the area was probably pretty much clear cut by 1900. There was a forest fire in 1878. It's hard to tell exactly what scale that was at. And then, of course, the quarrying became an industry close to Lake St. Catherine, we think around 1870, which could if it was getting into the watershed, which currently it is outside of the watershed. But if at that time they were piling any sort of debris within the watershed, then that definitely could have had something to do with it. But luckily, as you can see, accumulation has slowed back down in more recent years. So whatever historically was going on, it's improved, hopefully. But anyway, this was really interesting information to add to what we know about the lake.
Cool. Thank you, Emily.
Mm-hmm.
So some other in-lake conditions that we'll talk about. So every year we have a plant survey that's done around the whole lake in the fall. And we've been working with a company called Arrowwood Environmental. They've been coming here the last couple of years. So they gave us some interesting information the last couple of years, indicating that we have a excellent diversity of plants, and that we have 3 what they call distinct native aquatic natural communities or assemblages of plants in the lake. So you can see we've got the water naiad cobble shoal assemblage, the Robbins Illinois pondweed assemblage, and the water lily aquatic community assemblage. So the Robbins Illinois pondweed, so you probably know if you've been on the lake recently that the Illinois pondweed is probably one of our most abundant weeds. It's got the nice curly leaves, and it's got the little stem that'll grow to the top, provides very good cover for our aquatic animals. And that comprises over 70% of our vegetated littoral zone. The littoral zone is where plants can grow around the lake, where the sun can penetrate and the plants can grow. So back in the late 90s, when milfoil was at its peak, Illinois pondweed was almost eradicated from the lake because of the milfoil. It was one of the lowest available plants in the lake because it had been outcompeted by milfoil. So now it's that assemblage comprises about 70% of the lake's plants. And those reports are on our website that you can view. The reports are done visiting 199 GPS points that are on the lake in the littoral zone, and they are visited every year. And there's a rake toss done to see what plants come up at that exact point, and that's how they do these reports for us. And then this was new that the DEC just provided for us. So this was great to see. So this chart shows that our species richness, so at the points where the plants were surveyed, the species richness refers to the variety of different aquatic plant species found in the lake. So looking back at our plant surveys from 2001, when we started milfoil control program, so we ended the harvesting and we started doing milfoil control with spot treatments and dash and hand pulling. You can see that in all 3 basins, our species richness has increased, meaning the types of plants at those locations has increased, which is great to see and what you would expect when you control an invasive plant that has such an impact on our other plants. So that was a great data analysis to see from the DEC. So one thing we want to talk about that we've been working with Emily on, when she came on board to the team, she suggested the sediment testing, and then she also suggested that we do some additional water testing. So she suggested that we get some loggers that you can see right here. These devices, they stay in the lake full time, and they only come out when you hook up to a recorder to get the data off of them. So they're constantly getting information. So she suggested some dissolved oxygen loggers and some conductivity loggers. So you may have seen that in the State House, they're looking at a bill currently that would reduce salt use around the state. And that's a big deal for the lakes because we're starting to see the chloride levels go up. So the conductivity logger will actually allow us to measure salt stress on the lake. So for about 2 years, we've been working on getting a grant for this. We have been unsuccessful up until Monday. I can tell you this was awarded to us. So yes, we're very excited. So that's through the Lake Champlain Basin Program. That's about $14,000 worth of equipment that you see right there. And we'll also be working with Emily to create a system to figure out where the best place to put these loggers in each of the 3 basins. And then also this handheld device, we can set up a schedule to go to certain areas that are of interest and take readings at those areas. And then also target after big storms like we had on Saturday. With all that rain that was rushing into the lake, let's go check out at the end of Endless Brook and see what's going on, or let's go to one of our other tributaries and take some readings and see what's going on. And then we're also going to start looking at our macroinvertebrates, which are the bugs that live in the lake at our tributaries. So we're going to start doing some observations of those around the lake. So we're going to get some equipment and some methodologies together to look at those. And we're going to work with Emily on that, which is great. Okay, so current shoreline conditions. Oh, nice, beautiful picture of the lake there. Current shoreline conditions. Sadie, so I'm going to hand it over to Sadie.
Yeah. So we're moving out of the lake and now onto the shoreline. And we looked at this from a couple different ways. So kind of an overhead view, looking at the different land uses right along the lake, looking at those drainages there. And we found that around 18% of the shoreline around St. Catherine is kind of in its natural state. It's your forest blocks, your wetlands, park locations, and then the rest of it is developed. So that'd be your roadways, your kind of single residential areas, more of your neighborhoods. So that means that there's a lot of impervious surface like right on your shoreline, which is bringing a lot of water in. And then it also makes it challenging when we're developing projects because there's so many small parcels and so many landowners involved in all of them. And everyone has different management strategies. And so it adds another layer of complexity for projects. So we also, for this task, we took a boat tour and looked like in the field at some of these areas from the water. And we noted some project areas, and those on the map are the red dots. So those are more distinct projects that were identified. And then the white and black lines, those are areas that would be beneficial to prioritize for something like a Lake-wise program where it's more educational for landowners. Skip to the next one. So these are some of the things that we're looking for. So both these properties or neighborhoods are lawn to lake, so there's not a lot of that natural vegetation along the buffer. And I believe these are Idlewild and Kinnickinnick on the lake there. And so these buffers are really important for water quality. So you're having the runoff being filtered, slowed as it's going into the lake. It helps with erosive forces. So you're not having that like wave effect or ice breakdown of your shoreline. And then also it's really important for wildlife. That edge habitat is where a lot of critters like to go, both from a terrestrial standpoint and then also the aquatic. So things like this were areas that would benefit either from a larger planting that would involve multiple landowners, or somewhere that focusing lake-wise would be helpful to provide more individual parcel information. Next one. And these are areas that we look at for more distinct projects. So we see some like active erosion happening. So we'd be looking at ways to stabilize that, keep that sediment from going into the lake. And then looking for areas like the green space here, I think it's Gloria's property back there. So areas that have the space available to help infiltrate that water on the shoreline before it runs off. So those are some of the more distinct projects that I had the red dots for. I think we're going to Hillary.
Thank you. So Hillary with Poultney Meadowy Conservation District. So one of the other things we looked at both around the lake, the roads that almost circle the lake, and then farther up into the watershed were the roads. And we looked at the road network itself and how water drained off of those roads and whether it was draining directly into the lake or directly into a tributary that then went into the lake. And we also looked at the cross culverts, which are places where diffuse runoff is often, so cross culverts where we weren't carrying a stream under the road, but we were just looking at runoff going under the road. So where diffuse runoff from the landscape is then sort of condensed and put under the road in one location, and that those might be great areas where we could treat, a lot of stormwater in one place if we had space to do it. Perfect. So one of the things you're looking at on this map, I know there's a lot on this map, are the roads are color coded. And so we looked at the original condition of the roads. The state has kept track of all these roads have been inventoried for erosion and erosion issues. And then the red sections of road do not meet state standards. The yellow sections partially meet and the green sections meet. And they're specifically focused on areas that directly drain to streams. Now the town has been working on projects along all the segments of road that don't meet or partially meet the state standards. And the data is very slow to be uploaded into the state database. So this is sort of an older look at what the roads looked like. And we've gone out with the road crews for both Poultney and Wells and looked at all the sections that were marked on the map as not meeting state water quality standards. And both those towns are actively working they've either fixed the issues already or they're actively working to fix the issues. And it's an ongoing process because every time we get a big rainstorm, it can change the way that water drains off the road. Every time you plow in the winter, you can create the little plow, there's mounds along the side of the road, the edge of the plow leaves sort of a strip of raised sediment, and that keeps water from draining into ditches. So there are a lot of things that make it so that road maintenance, as you know, is very much an ongoing process. And then we identified places. So we're looking for projects that are sort of voluntary water quality projects, not projects that are required by a permit. So a lot of this work is required by permits already from the state. So we were specifically focused on areas where you might be able to do a project that's above and beyond what the state requires, and then that would be eligible for funds. And we could work with the towns to implement those practices or projects with funding that we could receive from local sources. So the purple on here, are potential areas where, where we might be able to go. I don't.
Where there's opportunities for projects, either associated with runoff from the town roads or just off the right of ways, because the towns actually,
Can't read that.
they sort of stay in their lane and focus on what they need to do to meet this permit, the municipal road general permit within the right of way. Right? If they start like chasing problems off the right of way, then they're off the plan. They got plenty of other things to do on their roads alone. So we were looking for opportunities where we might be able to work with the towns and address an issue that's like down slope, where the town runoff on the road is contributing to that. Work with adjacent owner and the town.
Yeah. And a couple of them are promising, and we've gone back multiple times to those sites. So I sort of look forward to those possibly moving forward. And then these are the cross culverts that I was talking about. So most of these are not streams going under the road, but they're just runoff from the road collecting and then going under the road at one place. And we went to each of these. So these are the watersheds basically that drain to these little culverts that go under the road. And we went to each of these cross culverts and we looked at sort of the volume of water coming under the road and then what space was there between where that culvert drained and then the lake itself. And was there a location where we might be able to put some type of a practice that would infiltrate water or slow water down, where we might be able to clean some, like drop some sediment and then clean that area up from the road and remove the sediment instead of having it go directly into the lake. Next slide. So these are a couple of examples. The photo on the right is one where a landowner actually reached out to the district and we planted some plants and created a little like a little bowl where water sort of slows down and sediment can filter out before it gets to the lake. And yeah, so the vegetation is done very well. That project is a couple of years old. And then there's an opportunity like on the left where there could be a planting if the landowner was amenable. So we just cataloged all of those potential opportunities. And there were 12 or 13 locations where we might be able to do something to help slow down and sort of drop sediment out of the water before the stormwater reaches the lake, clean up the water a little bit. All right, so this Sadie to talk about.
Yeah, so some of this has been touched on briefly by you, Heather, but yeah, so part of this task was to look at more in depth of the data has already been collected and then see opportunities where we could either add sites on and kind of expand that program of what we're actually seeing on the ground. So as you can see from the map, all of those red dots are sample locations for the different tributaries that are going into the lake. And then the colored pieces behind them, they are the watersheds. So all that land is draining into that stream, which is part of the full watershed of the lake. And our biggest one, obviously, is Endless Brook, the yellow blob there. And we have been sampling a spot on Endless Brook for a number of years now, historically. And then we added 5 sample locations in 2019 in association with the Stormwater Master Plan work that was taking place. And then through this current work, through the LWAP, we added 2 more sites. So you can see from the map, we're covering quite a bit of the watershed now from these sample locations. And some of the things we've been seeing kind of from year to year now that we have a couple years of this data is 03, so that teal watershed there, and 05, the kind of pink watershed. Those have tended to be higher levels of phosphorus over the past couple of years. And all of these have different like types that we're sampling from. So some of them are more of your traditional stream bed. Some of them are more of drainages from wetlands. So we can kind of see some of that reflected in the data as well. So for example, like 05, the pink one and the purple one, those are both drainages from wetlands. And so lots of times we're seeing during high flow events, we're seeing a lower amount of phosphorus going in. And then during low flow events, that's when the stream is just trickling through low flow, we're seeing a higher concentration of phosphorus. And that's kind of speaking to the processes within wetlands themselves and how they're attenuating the phosphorus. They're really good at absorbing everything, and then it's kind of like a slow release of a higher concentration. And so we're kind of seeing some of that play out. See, another thing to note here is that a lot of these actually go dry during the summer season. So that can make sampling challenging for us. And then it also kind of speaks to the timing of when nutrients is entering the lake, especially during storms or on kind of the shoulder seasons. I think with that, I will hand it over to
Andy Vermillier again, VTSU Castleton. It's great to see people so excited about learning about their water quality. So thanks for being here. So my role has been focused on the tributaries and more specifically Endless Brook, since it's the largest tributary into the lake. So a couple of years ago now, this is one of my students who's now graduated and working at New York State, DEC, doing some work. We established a stream gauge under so that's Route 30, actually, that concrete barrier right there is the bridge, Endless Brook going underneath the road there. And at the stream gauge, basically we just have a pressure transducer. We can measure stream height. So we can see how tall the water is, and that's related to the volume of water, as you can imagine. So we would go out there occasionally and measure the volume of water. And so we have a continuous record of the volume of water per time, which we call discharge, coming out of the stream. So is it high, is it low? But we have a quantitative measurement of that water coming out. That was kind of step one in order to really figure out what is the total export of chemicals, phosphorus, namely, coming from the river. Sadie was talking about concentration, so mass of a chemical per volume of water. Well, if we know the volume of water per time, and we bring those things together, we can figure out the mass of phosphorus that's going into the lake per year, per day, per storm event, that kind of thing. So we established this, this stream gauge, and we can go to the next one. And that allows us, and we're not going to like look at any of these graphs in depth, but something on the left, that's discharge on the left over time. And that's over the course of like 2 years of data, which I'm seeing now. I should probably update that. But I can see all the spikes when we had our storm events. We can see when it went dry, where it's 0 there for 2 months in the middle of the summer in 2021, when Endless Brook had no water in it for about 2 months. Yeah, so some pictures of the flow. And the other thing that we kind of historically do is there's usually some kind of relationship between the concentration of phosphorus in the stream and how high the water is, or how much the discharge is. You just heard Sadie talk about the wetlands, and when the wetlands are really low, they tend to have a higher concentration of phosphorus. That's not always the case for all of our streams. Endless Brook, it's like a gunshot. Like, there's not a really good correlation, which just means that we don't really understand probably like where are all the sources in the watershed and what's influencing the water quality in Endless Brook. So the last thing I'll just say is, you know, the samples, the concentrations that you've seen, it's kind of the summer season, right? Memorial Day to Labor Day, more or less. But we're seeing now some of the biggest discharges, you probably know, you live here, are like February, you know, when you get these like rain on snow events. So having a station like this established will allow us to look at these kind of off-season events and get like a bigger picture of what's going on in the largest watershed to the lake. So. The geomorphic.
Hey everybody, Evan Fitzgerald Environmental. And something Andy just mentioned was trying to get a handle on the sources of that sediment and phosphorus in the up in the watershed, and how, you know, his plot of discharge flow versus concentration didn't really give him any clues. So, or yet, I should say. So the stream geomorphic assessments are intended to provide some insight into that. What we do is we walk the streams. And in this case, we didn't walk the entire stream or every stream in its entirety. It was somewhat opportunistic, where we could get on the property, get access from the road, and get eyes on what we call different reaches. So different segments of stream that have pretty homogeneous characteristics in terms of the slope of the bed, and the width of the valley, that kind of thing. So here's just an example from Endless Brook. And I don't look at these numbers and make sense of them really. The idea is we're trying to get a sense of how the form of the river either conforms or doesn't conform with what we'd expect for a watershed of that size. So for example, we have relationships in Vermont where we say for a 10 square mile watershed, we'd expect to see, you know, a width of say 20 feet in the channel and a depth of, you know, say 1.5 feet. Well, if we go out on Endless Brook and we find that it's 6 feet deep and you know, 25 feet wide, which actually in some cases we did, that's a big departure from what we'd expect. And that indicates that the stream is either eroding or had eroded deeply in the past. And that gives us a sense of how much sediment might be coming out from that, you know, from the brook. and going down to the lake. So on Endless Brook in particular, we found, especially in the lower reaches close to the lake, really high incision ratio, what we call incision ratio, and that basically tells us how disconnected the stream is from its adjacent floodplain. And I think we have some pictures of that. Yeah, so if you were to park along Route 30, right past the state park, and jump down, dodge the poison ivy, and jump down into the stream, you would see a lot of this, like the left-hand photo, deepened stream with a lot of erosion on the banks and bed. And that probably owes to a history of, a long history of channel management that we have in Vermont, and I suspect on Endless Brook, where sediment was harvested to put on roads in the past, and it sort of left the stream in this kind of over deepened state. Just upstream of here, I'm sorry, what road is that? Endless, of course. It just escaped me for a minute. On Endless Brook Road, just upstream of there, there's erosion that happened in some recent floods. You can see, yeah, some armoring, some stone that was placed there. But you also see a floodplain that's redeveloped on that far bank. We don't have that condition just down from there. So streams will, if given the opportunity, redevelop that form that we're looking for, really, and that floodplain will absorb a lot of sediment and phosphorus in the future. And I think I'm going to turn it to Sadie to talk about some other small things.
So in addition to Endless Brook, we also did a smaller walk on 2 other streams, and we chose those based on the data that we had. So those were the 2 higher ones with phosphorus. So there's one on Bullfrog Hollow, and then one on near Capron Lane. And so we did walks along those, and we were noting any changes within the stream, whether they had, good access to their floodplain, where we saw erosion happening, and we were making notes of those. So this is the Bullfrog Hollow stream. It doesn't have like a solid channel as we would think of a stream, but it does wind through a couple different wetlands back there, and it actually is looking really good. Has a lot of woody debris, has access to its floodplain, just different changes in topography, lots of areas for phosphorus to drop out, sediment to settle. Really good looking wetland, doing all the things wetland are supposed to do. And then the stream on Capron Lane, most of it was actually in pretty good condition. There are some spots where there is kind of larger section of invasive species that we noted. There's a couple areas where culverts were constricting the stream size, and then some potential nutrient sources upstream as well. But for the most part, it looked in pretty good condition. There was a lot of woody debris. Again, it had pretty good access to its floodplain most of the way. So we identified a couple things within that stream, but for the most part, it looked pretty good. And then a total, I think, 5 projects were identified within the stream sector. I think the map on the next one shows that. Yeah, so those are the different projects, and then it also shows the reaches. So on that first table of the different incision ratios and measurements that we're looking at, those are the different spots that we had taken those. Yeah, and this is just another example. So a little farther up in the watershed, you're seeing a lot of that small gravel. So that's things that's being transported down. And then again, some more of the incision on the lower reaches of the Endless Brook. So you're seeing all that gravel being transported down. The stream is cutting its way through. And so it's eroding the banks there and kind of eating away that gravel.
So one of the things we did at the very beginning of this process is we looked at the data that was available for these different sort of natural resource conditions that we're talking about today within the watershed, and which areas didn't have as much data available. And we made a list of areas where we felt like there were gaps. And one of the things that we thought would be really interesting to look at would be to sort of quantify like what percentage of the watershed draining to the lake drains through wetlands. And so we ended up looking at we chose the 10 largest wetlands, and those are here in the sort of brownish color. And then those brown lines are basically the watershed for those wetlands. So all the water draining to those wetlands is outlined in the little brown lines that are sort of contiguous with the brown blobs, which are the wetlands. And so we thought, well, this is great because quite a high percentage of this watershed drains through a wetland. But how do we know the wetlands are functioning very well? And so we ended up, we took a couple of different trainings, and we used the Vermont State Wetlands Functioning worksheets, and we went out to each of those wetlands, except for one of them we didn't have permission to access, and another one we just had partial permission to about a third of the wetland. But otherwise, we went to all of the wetlands and we looked at the wetlands themselves, and then we hiked outside of the wetland into those areas that were draining to the wetlands. And we were able to sort of work through these worksheets to assess how well the wetlands were functioning, whether they were sort of working to drop out sediment and hold nutrients and filter water and store water, and whether they had interesting species and, you know, sort of things going on that were contributing in a positive way to the lake downstream. And the wetlands all scored very well. We were particularly focused on sections of the assessment that related to water quality. They scored very well. And in retrospect, which is great and great news for the lake, because that provides a sort of a buffer when you get big storms. The wetlands hold water, they store water during big storms, and then they release it slowly over time. So they help protect the stream channels that they're affiliated with from high flow conditions that could erode the banks like we've been talking about. They help mitigate that a little bit. So the wetlands scored very well. They were functioning well. In a lot of places, they were in sort of critical locations. The one thing that we realized afterward and may have done differently is that we didn't look at the smaller wetlands. So there are a lot of small wetlands that are also scattered throughout this watershed, that also have just smaller sort of areas that drain to them. And we didn't go and look at those. And I think there would have been a really interesting variety, and they would have been located sort of throughout that watershed that we didn't get to see. And we may have seen a little bit more influence of land management on those wetlands because they're a little bit less protected, a little bit less obvious. So in the future, that might be something that would be interesting. But I think what we did see was that the wetlands, especially the larger ones around the lake, are in good condition. They're functioning well. They're helping to protect the lake, and they're an asset to this lake. We did have a few places where we had some project recommendations. A lot of those were in the sort of the buffer or the lands near the wetlands. There were a couple of places where the buffer or the area near the wetland had like single trees. They would have like single species of trees, like ash, and ash is declining in our area. So we walked through one section of buffer to a wetland where all the trees were dying. And so places like that, we might want to look at replanting with a broader mix of species. But overall, things looked very good. So these were the sheets that we ended up. So we took the sort of those assessments, which were quite lengthy, and then provided a sheet like this for every wetland, and those will be compiled in the back of the Watershed Action Plan. So you can look at each of the wetlands that we surveyed, and then see a picture or two, a map of where it is, and then look at sort of how we scored things just generally. We sort of simplified the data that we collected and then presented it so you'd be able to look at it. And these are a couple of pictures of things that we saw. We've been talking about streams and streams being connected to their floodplain. So this is Millbrook, and it is very well connected to its floodplain. You can see that as it rises and falls during rain events, it just comes right up onto the shore, right onto the land, and floods out into that floodplain. It was one of the best connected streams that I've seen. And then this is this is the East Channel wetland, which is large. And it goes from, from being sort of terrestrial wetland and then to, it gets less and less water until finally it's sort of floating out in the channel. But large, beautiful wetland there also. And then one of the other places that we wanted to look at was just the forested headwaters. The Lake Champlain, so part of the reason Project Plain is getting too much phosphorus from its larger watershed that we're sitting inside of. And one of the areas where we're tasked with finding a lot of reductions in phosphorus is the forest sector, or the forested landscape. So we thought that one of the places we should really look is in the headwater forests in this watershed, to see if we could tell how resilient that area was to changing rainfall patterns and to development and things that are happening in the landscape. So this forest block, it's funny, it shows up really well on the model. It's on the southern part of the watershed, and it's on the eastern side of the watershed of the lake, up along as Endless Brook Road sort of heads south and turns into Sawmill Hill Road. It's in that area. It's large. It's a large forest block. It scores well. The state has sort of done this scoring of forest blocks to see which ones are intact and which ones support natural communities that they're supposed to be supporting. And this is a high quality forest block. So the forest block is the turquoise on the picture on the right. And you can see it's not outlined then in the picture on the left, but those blue polygons or those are properties. Those are areas that we walked on the properties and were able to look at the different forest characteristics and sort of see how everything looked, how it might look during a thunderstorm, for example. So we looked at little tributaries up on people's properties. We looked at the woods roads. We looked at the composition of the forest. And we just tried to picture how things might look during a thunderstorm as the water in the stream increased and the runoff along roads might increase. And generally things looked pretty good. People were not using their forest roads and they were using them lightly. A lot of places trees were coming back that might have been agricultural or logged in the past. The tributaries had a lot of bedrock in them. In fact, there was a lot of bedrock in all of these steep properties, which makes sense given the fact that we have the cliff faces against the lake. So they actually did look pretty resilient. And you could see evidence of past, like heavier land use in the past, as we know that talk about the whole area being deforested originally and now sort of growing back. So you could see some use of that, like old scars of roads and different things happening. But generally looked pretty resilient. There were a lot of places where there were steep lands, but then they would sort of gradually ease out into a flatter area, and that was pretty consistent on people's properties. So where you might have erosion, it would be captured in these little flatter areas at the bottom of the steep. So generally, things did look very resilient. Again, we had some single species stands in the forest, especially hemlock, quite a bit of hemlock. So the little purple spots in the middle of the turquoise forest block are natural communities that are special within the state. And then the next slide, we can look a little bit at that. So like that area on the right that has the sedge and looks very park-like, that is one of our natural communities. It's common here in Wells, but it's very rare elsewhere in Vermont. So that's a hop hornbeam natural community with all the sedge underneath, and beautiful. Like every property had at least a little bit of that on it. That's just an example of a stream sort of in the middle of the woods. And then on the left is a beech tree with beech bark disease. So it's those type of pressures that we have on our woods, pathogens coming in from elsewhere that might cause trees to die that we'll just have to kind of keep an eye on. And hopefully other trees will replace those. All right, so I'll pass it back to Evan for that exciting part of the projects and ways to mitigate all this going forward.
All right. Okay, we're going to hop right into here. Yep. Well, let me just say, before we get into these detailed projects, so I think we started with a list of somewhere around 60 to 70 projects, maybe more. I was just trying to look back at the table to refresh my memory. It's been a little bit of time, but through all these assessments that we just described, we identified different project areas. And of course, then the next trick is how do you sort that list? So some of them, we started with like condensing it roughly in half to about a list of about 40 project sites. And some of the areas don't lend themselves to the kind of prioritization that I'm about to describe because they're just like, you know, programmatic recommendations like in the forest, big blocks, et cetera. But with the 40 or so projects, we looked at their ability to reduce phosphorus and sediment to the lake, what they might cost. Of course, this is just an initial ballpark cost. Whether a landowner, whether we know or not if the landowner, whether we know if the landowner is willing or not to participate and cooperate with the project, and a few other merits that would help us like sort the project list to then kind of focus in further and pick a even shorter list of sites for design, and then to kind of set a few aside for the near future for design. So through all that process, with a lot of input from the Lake Association and even a meeting that probably many of you attended, we got input to trim that list down, and we ended up with 3 project sites that we thought represented like 3 different types of opportunities that are common across the watershed. So a shoreline project, and that's what this one is, around Locklear Lane. We're using shoreline loosely in the sense of, you know, mitigation that could happen right close to the shore to either mitigate stormwater or to do a planting. And we picked a stream project on Endless Brook, and then on Channel Drive, a drainage that's kind of somewhere in between a stream and a stormwater issue. So Locklear Lane, this is Mark here, by the way? No. Okay. Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, all right. But it's Gloria, right? Yes. Oh, yeah. The erosion, you mean? Or, yeah.
I mean, they cut every tree on the property.
Oh, that, okay.
Cut all the trees, cut all the plants, and then put it in a golf course lawn. What are you gonna have?
Yeah.
That's my property, and it's the people before me.
What's that?
That was my property, it's people before me. I don't think so. Mark back then.
No, I believe that was Mr. Rosen.
That's
My name is Bruce. We bought it back in the 60s, 1960 actually.
Okay. So this is on Mark Shea's property, and it's kind of a mirror image to your site, Gloria, and what we're trying to do there, because both of you have steep, you know, roads, driveways, kind of switchbacking around and coming down to the lake. This is Mark's driveway. You can see from the photographs, it's very steep, and there's a lot of erosion happening along the edge. And there's no defined ditch or swale that's, you know, accommodating that runoff. So can I actually use that? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Oh no, I messed it up. There we go. So here's the steep driveway, and this photograph is showing erosion kind of right off the edge of the driveway there, which is here. So we're talking about each one of these little yellow triangles would be a check dam, a stone check dam that would slow the flow coming down, and in a defined ditch. And then it would come down into a rain garden or bioretention basin, which is a depression in the ground with special plants and soil media that's going to filter, sort of store that surge of water and filter it. And on Gloria's property right here, similar, we're not showing all the details, but a very similar approach. And that's why I say it's a mirror image, because it's almost the same thing happening on both sides. So here's just a rendering of what this might look like. Here's the erosion coming down, kind of hugging the edge, and this is the sewage disposal area, the septic mound here. So we can't we can't cut into there, utilize that space. And then the basin, we need to discuss this with Mark to make sure he's okay with the space that we're planning to take up. But we would hopefully utilize a small portion of the edge of the driveway for a basin there, which is kind of, yep.
There's several property owners along that driveway lane, and how does that get financed? Responsible to the landowner where the improvements are? Is it everybody on the road?
Oh, good question. So, I'm sorry, Lockley Lane is a private drive. So this project, and Hillary can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it would be funded with state clean water funding to finish the design, and the same goes for your project, Gloria. And it would be implemented with clean water funding and maintained with clean water funding, assuming that there is a phosphorus benefit to the lake that can be quantified and makes the project cost effective. Everything that, and Hillary hasn't talked about the other part of her work, which is, as a clean water service provider. So, looking for projects that sort of give the biggest bang for the buck in terms of phosphorus reduction and cost. So if this project were to check out in that way and prove cost effective, it would be funded and maintained essentially by the state through the clean water service provider. Yeah, and this is actually not along the private portion of the road. This is on Mark's individual driveway, I believe. Yeah.
Yes, correct. The road coming in from 30 around that corner up there, that's common.
Yeah, so if we go back here, here's Lockley Lane, shared. I'm assuming you have, easements and some sort of shared maintenance agreement. Yeah. So a project.
Yes, curve there is the road going off to the right goes to what was my aunt's camp.
Okay. So if a project, your question is a relevant one, if a project were to be done up here on the private drive, that would affect more than just Mark as an individual owner, and you'd all have to agree on it, I presume, and agree on how it looks and how it's going to be maintained. This is a little simpler. It's down below.
At home for one of the projects, this is not the only one that has are we talking the state would pick that up and make that cost?
And we'll talk about next steps too.
Yeah.
After some presented projects, we'll talk about that.
Yep. Sneak preview. For the time being, there's ample state funds for these types of projects. We're trying to take advantage of that. Any other questions on that one before I hop to the next one? Okay. So here's Endless Brook. I mentioned, the area I was talking about that has a lot of erosion is, here's Route 30. Here's the state park. Here's the lake. Endless Brook is flowing east to west and really beginning to ideally fan out into this natural floodplain area as it approaches the lake. But we found that it's not really fanning out very well, partially because of that history of maintenance in the stream, and it's really deeply incised all through here. So we one solution to reconnect the floodplain and try to get those floodwaters that are carrying such high amounts of sediment and phosphorus to get out onto the floodplain is to reconnect the floodplain either by lowering the floodplain, like excavating it and bringing it down closer to a level where the stream is fluctuating from low to high, or raising the bed of the channel where we can to try to get that water to spill out of it, of its channel into the floodplain. So I wanted to show you these two concepts. One is just upstream of Route 30, a small area, less than an acre, and another one's larger down by the mouth, about 2.5 acres. This one we'd be lowering the floodplain, excavating. Down here, we'd be doing a little excavating to remove an impediment to floodplain connectivity, which is a berm, and raising the channel to try to get it to spill out. So on the downstream end, and this is a profile or a cross section. So if you were standing in the stream and looking downstream, this is a miniaturized version, of course, of what you'd see. Here's the channel, here's that berm, which is right there. This line represents the section that's sort of cut along this orange line here. This steep bank here is a mound, like a high point here, and there's the stream. And these different lines show where we'd expect different flood levels to reach. And the 2-year flood and even the 100-year flood are actually down the channel. So suggests that the channel is disconnected from its floodplain. It looks a little better as you go downstream, but here it's pretty pronounced. So we'd be doing some excavation to remove this berm so that those floodwaters could jump out into the channel. And then down here where now we're downstream of any infrastructure, downstream of a bridge, and there's not a lot of risk to altering the channel so that raising it. And we do this by adding wood into the channel, because wood is really good at capturing sediment that's coming down the stream. You're basically slowing the water and creating spaces for that sediment to build up. It's a really effective way to raise the channel, reconnect the floodplain. So that would be the idea down here, and we'd hope to kind of reconnect a bigger area off to the north. So that's one concept. And this one is probably, I would say, more viable. And it's on state land, so that usually state is a good partner to support these projects. The other project is upstream of Route 30 and probably less feasible, but I wanted to show you the concept anyways. Here's this really deepened channel. Again, this is a profile cut along this orange line. There's Endless Brook Road, whose name I forgot a moment ago. We'd be excavating down this floodplain quite a bit. It'd have to be excavated down several feet to basically create a new floodplain in here for those floodwaters to spill out. That's a lot of earth moving. There's this was a pasture or a hayfield about 30 years ago, but it's now grown up in some young trees, and so that'd be a lot of disturbance. But still a project that is, on the table potentially. Okay, and then lastly, Channel Drive. And in a second, I'll show you an overview map, but we, as part of the other stormwater scoping project that Jeremy mentioned at the beginning, we've been looking at Channel Drive a little more holistically. We picked one site to do a concept design for the LWAP, and this is 139 Channel Drive. Is the owner here? No, okay. We had a bunch of, I can't picture the owner right now, but the day we were out there, we had a bunch of conversations with her. Anyways, there's a lot of runoff that comes off the western side of the slope, up slope of Channel Drive, and it all sort of gets caught in the ditches on the west side of Channel Drive. And in this case, there's a cross culvert that's now like pretty long and buried beneath the driveway, and where it shoots out, it's there's a short run of channel that's been armored, but it's still pretty eroded, and I know it's probably hard to see, but there's a lot of sediment dropped out right where this channel meets the lake. So we're looking to stabilize this channel and also control the flow into it, because this is sort of a unique overflow situation. There's storm flow can go either north or build up and cross the channel. And again, you probably can't see this all that well, but there's some details here showing how we would sort of build up a little stone head wall to only let the biggest flows come through that channel, and most of the other flows would sort of continue on to the north, so you'd be reducing the frequency of that erosive flow down to that channel. And then doing some what we call energy dissipation, so little steps and pools down that channel, so that as flow comes down, it's dropping into these pools, swirling around, dissipating some of that erosive energy and continuing down. And here's just an overview. We did look at all the culverts along Channel Drive, if there's anyone who lives on Channel Drive that's here, as part of this other project. So this is an outcome of that project. And we kind of assessed each culvert's capacity to handle different storms. And it's kind of a guide for where there's vulnerabilities, along the road in terms of erosion. So that guide's out there as well. Any questions on those? And then we also, just quickly, we're going to zoom through these other projects that we identified that are sort of placeholders for the future. So this one, and they're kind of a mix of stream and shoreline and stormwater. This is way up in the headwaters of Endless Brook. This is Lamb Hill Road, undersized culvert on a town road in Wells. Town's certainly aware of it. There's been erosion issues there in the past.
Yeah, the culvert's been changed. I don't know if it is, it's scheduled.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good.
Is that the project we looked at?
It's one of the ones we looked at, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so after our meeting, we went back out with the town and they were pleased to apply.
It's by the landings, right, by the trailer, if you're going through.
Not that one. This is the one that's up, you go around the corner and it kind of opens up and it's.
Oh,
Way up at the top. This one's.
one of the other problems is that becomes springs, a little blurb in there. Middletown.
Yeah, that's that one.
Yeah, and getting Middletown. We plow it, we maintain it, and they get a good deal.
Okay. But this is in Wells? You're just saying like the access on either side. Okay. So even though this one's way out in the headwaters, far from the lake, it's still a good project. So it's good to think about projects in that way. They're distributed all around the lake, but they all, especially on a stream the size of Endless Brook, if there's a lot of erosion here, all that suspended sediment is making its way down to the lake. So this would be upsizing this culvert to better match the what we call the bankfull channel of the stream. So this one, a couple projects on Westlake Road by Catherine Caper Lane. And all these maps are kind of weird. They're oriented north is to the left. So this one's got about a 15-acre drainage area upslope, and you can kind of tell from the photo it comes through an undersized metal pipe. And because it's undersized and the velocity is so high, you can see it scours a pool below it. So I think the town is interested in upsizing this culvert. They've talked about that. And another practice that could be done just downstream is stabilizing this channel, perhaps putting some additional pools, kind of like what I was talking about on Channel Drive, and dissipating that energy as it goes down to the lake. Just east of there, that other project was here. Just over to the east, there's a decent sized drainage. I think it's about 10 acres that about what I'm drawing or highlighting here. All of this flows down, gets caught in a ditch on the uphill side of Westlake Road. And there's an opportunity to do possibly in an area straddling the right of way and private property. We'd need to talk to the owner. to do a stormwater feature in here, like a basin, and to filter the water and slow it down. This is just up the road on Westlake Road to the north. Here's a stream that's shown in this blue line here, kind of channelized as it makes its way down to the lake. And there's some similar opportunities to what I talked about a minute ago in terms of culverts and creating a more stable path for the flow to get down to the lake. And then there's Forest House Lane, which is actually a really big watershed. It's about 150 square miles, 150 acres. That's typically what we call a perennial stream, that size watershed. So it's sustaining flow throughout the year. And we've looked at some erosion issues on Butternut Hill Road and beavers around this crossing here. But all of this flows down, and it's been observed to have high turbidity, high sediment where it enters the lake. It's really kind of a challenging area to address because it's, where the stream comes down through here, it's really tight and squeezes through a lot of infrastructure. So this is kind of a challenging one that we wanted to highlight in terms of trying to find a solution.
And then we got one more last slide. So what we want to tell you about is, so there's going to be a report, so a paper report for the Lake Watershed Action Plan. We're working on that, and we hope to have that available for you to review next week. So we want to have you take a look at that, plus all the appendices and other information that we're going to provide. It'll be in a folder for you to take a look at. And if you have any comments or questions, please get them to us by 6:20. You can email us at info@lakesaint.org. Just go to our website. We want that information before we submit the final report, which will be at the end of the month. And then one other final thing that we want to talk about is the funding that Joel had brought up. So there's the Clean Water Service Provider, and they fund projects that reduce phosphorus. So that's what our projects will do. Evans Designs will be able to take those and go to the Clean Water Service Provider, which is the South Lake Champlain service provider, and we'll be able to apply for grants to implement those projects. So that's the next step for the projects that we'll have designed. So with that, I think that's it for us today. So thank you very much for coming. And I definitely want to take another second to thank the project team. That's Hillary, Sadie, and Pulteney Meadowy. That's Evan from Evan Fitzgerald. That's Andy from Vermont State University at Castleton. And Emily, our limnologist, Emily Porter-Goff. They've been great to work with. They've put in a ton of work on this. It's been a 3-year project, and we're grateful for all the work that they've put in for the lake. So another round of applause for those folks. Thank you. So we'll get you a link with all the report and all the information. We'll post that on social media and our email list, and we'll let you know when that's available so you can take a look and provide us any feedback after you read through the report.